Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being willing and open to participate in our second Zoom episode of VGM Community Convos. We're super excited to open up a safe space for all of us to engage and offer our opinions on different topics. And with us honoring human rights on the 21st of March, we thought we'd open up the topic of equating animal rights to human rights. You'll be joined by the VGM team, Danny, myself, and Rish. And others are also interested in sharing their thoughts, being mindful not to pass judgment onto others for their opinion. Before we get into how everything works, I thought we'd use this time just to introduce ourselves to each other. I'll go ahead. My name is Sean. I'm from the Vegan Goods Market. I'm here joined by Danny and Risha, who's also on the VGM team, to guide and facilitate this conversation. Who's next?
I'm Lamise, Karim from the Black Lotus, the Black Lotus Healing Sanctuary. I curate personalized events for healing to take place in public, usually outside. And I'm also an animal activist, and I thought this talk was spot on, so thank you for the invite. I started as an animal activist, I think maybe 10 years ago, when I was forced to consider becoming a person who doesn't eat products that are made from animals. And the doctor told me that my body can't digest it. So I was forced into it. And then the spiritual aspects of it came much later. But I dived in. I wanted to know what all the different cultures said about it. And I found a few interesting ones that sat well with me. So I try and create projects where there aren't maybe the violence towards animals. Ahimsa has been a really big aspect of my life. So yeah, I can't wait to hear what's going on with everyone else.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lamise. On to you, Elsie.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elsie. I wish I had a formal introduction, but I'm just a student. I'm very grateful that I was invited to join, to be a part of this conversation. I think I just want to be a part of more conversations like this, which is why I was absolutely ecstatic and very forward when it came to the invite. I'm looking forward to hearing what everybody else has to say. You know, my opinions can very much grow from this experience.
Awesome. On to you, Kayla.
Hi, everyone. It's so lovely to meet all of you. I'm Kayla from Justice Desk Africa. I'm from a human rights nonprofit based here in Cape Town, and we work across Africa. And I jumped at the chance to kind of come on board and share our perspective around grappling with this type of topic. It's such an interesting one in our context. And I'm really excited to get to know all of you and to learn more about your opinions and see how we can start the conversation around these and any type of alignments and synergy. So yeah, I'm excited.
On to you, Risha.
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry that you can't see me, but I'm Risha. I work with Sean on the Vegan Goods Market. I've been a part of Sean's life forever, and we're kind of partners on this journey with VGM. I have been vegan for about 7 years, and it's also a conversation that I think is really interesting, just given the melting pot of cultures that South Africa is and that Cape Town is. A lot of the time we see talking about things like this to be a bit of a barrier when speaking to people who eat meat. So I'm very excited to see, the type of discussions that we have today and, maybe the outcomes that we can take forward and put into practice.
Hi, everyone. I'm Danny. I'm the VGM social media coordinator. I work with Sean and the rest of the VGM team, and I've been vegan for about this is going to be my 3rd year now. And I'm excited for this conversation.
Guys, thank you once again for your lovely introductions. It's so lovely meeting all of you. Let's go through how our conversation will work. Everyone was asked to prepare 3 sheets, writing on each one, I agree, I disagree, and in the middle. Awesome. We'll share statements around equating animal rights to human rights that you'll agree to, disagree to, or feel neutral towards. After we make the statement, you'll have 3 seconds to give your answer, keeping your page up, showing your answer to the camera. And thereafter, you'll share your reasons why, being mindful not to pass judgment onto others for their opinion. Cool, guys. Let's get to our statements. Are you guys ready? Number 1. I believe that animals should have the same rights to live freely just as humans do. 3, 2, 1.
I am an animal activist, but I'm also a rescuer, and I currently live in a domestic situation, and I have 17 canines.
Wow.
And I could say that the pit bull who recently had 7 puppies needed a co-parent. You know, so in the wild it would be a little bit difficult for particular animals to I guess live in a particular way. If we're thinking about feral animals, I also live in the Eastern Cape sometimes, and a lot of the animals are quite feral and they do give birth there. But I suppose that they weren't domesticated before that. So there's the middle there.
I echo a lot of that. I know mine didn't really show up, but I fell in the middle as well. I mean, there's certain things that we can't equate to animals in the same way that we equate to humans. That's not to say that they don't deserve protection when they need it and free spaces when they need it and the right to sort of be and exist. But humans have played a heavy role in domesticating animals. And I think in that we have a lot of responsibility as well to oversee for their best interest. You know, we've seen many young dogs in township communities who have given birth over and over and over again, and it's not actually great for their bodies in the context they live in. So always being mindful of that. How do we look at the best interests of the animals, in particular the ones that we have had a hand in domesticating?
It's the exact same reasons for me. I'm in the middle because it's also, I think, a place where you can be realistic about the way you feel, like what you do want and how it can play out in the real world. Because yes, we'd like for all animals to be considered when we have these conversations, but it's not exactly realistic or possible. It's something we do, subjectively want, but it's just not realistic in my opinion.
So I fell in the middle as well. I think that all sentient beings deserve to just be treated right, and to not be abused and oppressed. And I think that the caveat here comes with people having rights, beings having rights. It can't come at the expense of another. So, looking at it from a bit of a pragmatic approach, if we look at it from a subsistence farming perspective. The animal being sorted and those kind of things, it's difficult to equate that with the human lives being fed. So it's a very tight line to walk between the two of them. Idealistically, in a perfect world, yes, everybody should be equal, but that line between equality and one being superior over the other, it's really difficult to define that.
Thank you so much. On to statement number 2. Animals should not be used for food, clothes, medicine, or in any human consumption products, and should not be used for science experiments. 3, 2, 1.
I am a science student. I'm studying to become a scientist. It's not always comfortable for me to see us like experiment on animals, but I think the where I find myself currently is thinking about, it's hard to say, the greater good. And I know it's awful that an animal needs to be sacrificed for the greater good, but I know that from that, a lot more positivity or like an advancement in science could potentially happen. That's where I am.
I am a practicing Hare Krishna, so we believe that anything that is derived from animal products is like the Muslim version of being an halal. And it's been interesting because I've been involved in the movement. I think back and forth and kind of deriving the philosophies for about 8 years now, and it still doesn't sit well with me to be dealing with anything related to animal products. And also from a karmic perspective, you do actually receive a karmic backlash if you are engaging in anything that is derived from animals. When I found that out, it kind of changed things for me, because the scripture that confirms it, the ancient yoga texts speak about it. There's karma for everything. There's karma for engaging or marginalizing the use of plants. So we have to, when we do it, we have to do it with our hearts. We have to ask the plant spirits for permission to consume them. It's exactly the same as someone who sits in ceremony and does the animal sacrifices. They do similar things, but I think there's choices that we make in our lives when we move away from it, and we kind of look for other places where it doesn't exist. And I think that's sort of what I found by exploring a little bit.
You were talking about ahimsa when you were introducing yourself. Could you
Yes.
tell us a little bit more about what that is, and is it part of why you made the decision?
So ahimsa means non-violence, and it means non-violence towards any living being. It's related closely to the concept of using the word namaste in yoga, because you're recognizing the soul of the living entity sitting in front of you. I'm a practicing Hare Krishna, but I'm also a priest. I've been ordained there. So I teach philosophy at all the major universities around the country. And what I try and do is simplify it. And the concept of ahimsa is something we can do in every step that we take. Whether it's the thought of love towards ourselves, the smile that you give to somebody else while you're taking that next step. It's all about loving everything. In the concept of loving everybody and everything, we start small. We kind of start with the first positive thought, and then it snowballs into the bigger ahimsas, where you're deciding to not eat the animals anymore or engage in anything made with animals, because the heart is now being cleansed, because that is the process of ahimsa.
Thank you so much, Amis.
This is one where I pulled up the I agree and the in the middle, just because from an individual perspective, you know, making the choice to be vegan and making the choice to move away from any type of animal byproduct in as far as humanly possible in a world that isn't vegan is obviously comes with its challenges. But I think the reason why I added in the middle, it kind of, I'm sitting in between both of your points there, because I think where it boils down to is in the work that I'm doing in a human rights space, where it is very human being focused. You know, the lens is on how do we do the best interest of children, how do we do the best interest of people, without maybe always considering how those around you, whatever type of being, whether it's an animal or, you know, an entity or whatever that is in the position. But at the end of the day, how it currently works in our world is we do need medicine and we do need access to certain products until the alternatives come to be. Now, I think the difficulty comes into, and we talk about it at the Justice Desk a lot, is the concept of barcode voting. You know, it's not just down to what you purchase on the shelf, it's your actions, it's the words you use, it's how you behave in a space. You're voting for a new norm. And we're seeing it in the vegan community. We're seeing it with something like milk alternatives as the big boom that happened. You know, the industry thought, no, this will never change, there will never be an alternative, but there were a committed group of small people that grew and grew and grew, and it sort of started to transcend the, you know, the ideas of veganism being associated to a particular race or particular culture or particular way of being. It became down to a lot of what has been amazingly said, you know, around a culture of non-violence and how do we put it everywhere. But still understanding that the context that we live in South Africa and in a broader world, we're not there yet. It's not to say that we mustn't do it. It's not to say that those of us in positions of privilege, or not even positions of privilege, positions of awareness and knowing that there is an alternative, we do not always have to fall into the pattern. I mean, if we can discover what we've discovered as human beings, we can discover alternatives. I mean, just looking at the animal testing that has gone on for so many years, the reality is that we have alternative ways of finding things out. We do not need to utilize the bodies of animals in the process or harm people or animals in the process to find out information. But we're still on that cusp of learning and growing. And it's not to say, oh, you know what, oh, it has to happen. No, I work with people who, you know, they eat the animal, they eat every aspect of it, they bless it. It is the clothing they use is made from said materials. And again, we're still separating the animal and the being from what it gives to a person, but we're still surviving in our spaces. So those of us that can step up and say, actually enough, we can do alternatives, we're going to start voting for something, and it's simple supply and demand. The more we vote for an alternative, the more it's going to be on the shelf. The more we vote for a new way of behaving, the more it's going to become the norm. The more we vote for a particular slang word, the more everyone's going to be using it. So I hate to be on the fence in these types of things, but playing devil's advocate, it just speaks to, we can have a leading wave, but people are going to be left behind in the process. We don't understand that there's some elements that people just don't have access to alternatives just yet. And the alternatives are out there. We've seen it. We see people living with the alternatives and living better lives, and lives with better karma, and lives with better, you know, less harm, less violence. So that's why I would say agree in an ideal world, in the middle, to ensure that no one's left behind in the process. Yeah, thank you.
I am more inclined to support a human rights organization instead of an animal rights organization. This doesn't mean that I will not support one and not the other. 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Risha, what do you have to say?
So I think that animals remain voiceless, even though that things are changing and people are starting to realize that things need to change. But at the same time, human rights, and I mean, this is just kind of one point, in the full perspective, but human rights organizations get so much support and so much money, and they're part of CSI initiatives from large enterprise companies and organizations. A lot of, marketing budget goes into that. There's billboards about things. And I feel like the animal rights side of things, it's just not seen as big of a problem, or as big of something that should be, important, that people should be contributing to and thinking of. So from my side, I do prefer to, contribute and support animal organizations, purely from a perspective that if we aren't helping them, there isn't anyone else to do so. Globally, people help human rights organizations, but the animals are left behind.
For me to say that I agree, I think for many of the situations where I have been supporting human rights organizations, I've always been the person who talks about, well, if we do this for humans, how is it going to affect non-human animals? How is it going to affect other things? And I operate in that system. I think maybe it's the vegan in me, but I always take that seat to make sure that when conversations are being had on behalf of humans, we don't leave behind the fact that we have all these other relationships with animals, with nature, with the environment that are not included in that conversation. So I think it's very hard to just have, it's becoming increasingly hard to just have conversations about humans alone and not talk about the effects that we have on other things. And so that's my current position. Yeah.
It's so interesting that this question is about my life. I've been doing quite a lot of work in the plant medicine aspects to find my purpose. And I returned back to what I was doing a good 3 years ago when I was doing my apprenticeship with one of my teachers. She owns an animal rescue project, and it services all the townships here in Cape Town. And we currently have about 50 canines in the system that we've rescued from townships on the Cape Flats. And we feed them every day. I personally cook for the 17 I've got, and we kind of have different spaces where they live with us, and I'm a full-time carer. And the funding that is available currently is only the self-funding that we do ourselves. And then I'll do like certain projects related to my other businesses where we do fundraising using those businesses. But it's all self-funded because there is absolutely nothing available in this country for our animals. Even the funding coming from overseas is really marginalized for animals. It's not a priority in the world. And being in circles where you see people very passionately doing work for animals in South Africa, it's quite a big deal for us, especially people that rescue, because animals is the essence of our lives. It's become the choice to look for things to relate to people with.
Comparing artificial insemination of dairy cows to sexual assault is insensitive to the human being's trauma. 3, 2, 1.
So this is a tough one. I mean, the work that we do is heavily involved with survivors and survivor focused and sexual trauma and assault. And I think the reason why I'm in the middle is because I want to lead towards agree, but I also want to keep my mind open because everything is framed around the human experience in our world. So speciesism, it's a major factor that determines what we say, what we do. And being a woman in South Africa, having experienced a lot of what we should not have experienced, it becomes very, very difficult. It's a very difficult topic because of the way we place animals and because it's been so heavily normalized. And it sounds terrifying, but our women are being placed in spaces where they are being herded like cattle, and that's an insult because of the way cattle are herded. It's an insult in the way people. So I would say in the middle, I would say going up to a survivor and associating anything with their experience negates their experience, because in and of their experience, it's their own, and any type of comparison can take away from said experience. But I think we just need to always be mindful of the lens that we're coming from, and it's informed heavily by speciesism, and we value one over the other. And I'm not saying which one we should. I don't have the answer to it, and that's probably why I'm in the middle, because I won't go up to one of the girls that we work alongside or one of the people that we work alongside and say to them, oh, your experience is just like that, because what right do I have to ever equate anything with whatever someone's going through? But I do think it's always important to be mindful of the lens that we come from and the way the current system that we have going. There's nothing natural about artificially inseminating a being that has no choice in the matter. So yeah, thank you.
I think for me, it's when the conversation gets there, people will understand the reason to why some people choose to correspond or to make a comparison between the two. I definitely agree with Kayla that our perspective is from the human perspective. Once we get to a point where we can, which a lot of vegans already do, where we can consider how this feels to women, how women who've gone through this experience feel, we can start taking that feeling and express it onto non-human animals as well, because there is a feeling of artificial insemination not being natural. You see that correlation, it is there for a reason, and the comparison is not so much to devalue somebody else's experience, but it's also to look at how do these two things correspond without trying to offend anybody, and trying to create animal rights that actually reflect the rights we have for humans as well.
So this is a very difficult one. I was teetering between agree and in the middle, and just it was so difficult for me to make that decision. I think that we need to look at it from an emotional standpoint and how the words that we say can affect human animals who have been
victims of sexual assault. The comparison is there. It's, if we just look at it black and white, straight up blunt, completely objectively, it is the same physical thing that is happening. But from an emotional perspective, from a human perspective, from an empathetic perspective, we can't say it just like that, especially in the space that we are now, where that cognitive dissonance is still so rife in the majority of the population. We're trying to make that comparison seems like we're being absolutely ridiculous and heartless, because there is kind of that divide between human animals and non-human animals. I think also it is important for us, and which it's very difficult for, again, non-vegans to understand this, but when it comes to conversations like this, when we talk about ethics and rights and any social justice issues, we need to remember that everything needs to be intersectional. One of these things can't exist without the other. You can't be a feminist woman without realizing what happens to the non-human animals. You can't be actively anti-racist but be transphobic at the same time. You can't. There's all of these things bleed into one another, and it becomes a holistic view of society. So separating one from the other is very, very difficult, but I think it's the approach that we need to take, and it's the journey that we need to take to get there that's going to make the biggest difference.
I think maybe I can share a little more. I am someone who, it's hard to say the words, but I'm a victim of sexual assault. So I have decided to find more kind of ways to deal with the cow situation in my life, because I do feel, I agree that it's similar, or energetically it's the same. And I've witnessed interesting things because of the cultural exchanges and all of that. And I've witnessed how cows are treated outside of that realm of existence. I've witnessed how cows have been worshipped and dressed up in golds and in beautiful arrangements of flowers, and treated the way maybe I would treat my mother, to take her flowers and gifts and those sorts of things, So I've seen the difference. I've been there for the experience of the cow as well. And the concept of ahimsa in the Hare Krishna faith is that we will only eat from the worshipped cow, the animal products, because it is blessed. Or we will use it in our puja, those sorts of things. So there's sacred aspects to it as well. And they believe that the deities, all of the deities, live within the carcass or the body of the cow. So the cow is basically God and God's government and all of those sorts of things. So if you put it into a philosophical kind of understanding, if we're destroying the consciousness of the cow, then we are literally disconnecting from God, and that is basically what I'm seeing in society. And again, this is my own observation, but I'm realizing the disconnect now. I see now why it's okay for you to eat the Viennas and the penny polonies and those things, because your consciousness is marginalized. And I see the difference in the township I live, because I do not get animal products here. I have to leave here to go and get food for myself. My hunting and gathering needs to be just a vibration above this for me to go and eat food. I get vegetables here for really good prices. I really like that. But I don't get the milks and I don't get any of those things. So I live on an island. So I see the difference in the consciousness and what's needed and all of those things. But I also have to be the active change. I have to be the person that still drinks the coconut milk here in this neighborhood. And I will leave to go and buy my food. I'm quite comfortable hunting and gathering in my region, but it's all about that vibration. And if I don't want to exist on a particular vibration, I can decide not to live there anymore and maybe raise the vibration.
We'd just like to extend our appreciation to you for sharing your story. We know that it is a sensitive topic and conversation, and it's something that is difficult to talk about. But we do appreciate you for sharing it with us, as we know that your story will definitely help other people who will be watching this to help them on their journey. So thank you once again for sharing your story.
Oh, you guys are most welcome. It's nice to be able to speak about it in safe spaces, because that leads to healing also. So thank you. Thank you for being so supportive. It means so much to me.
Our last statement goes like this. The vegan movement's message is diluted when we bring human rights into the mix. 3, 2, 1.
I think that, again, we need to think about things from an intersectional perspective, where you can care about two things at once. It doesn't mean that if you are picking an animal rights, as a cause that you care about, that you can't also care about humans and you can't also care about the environment. I think also looking at human rights with the mindset shift that is slowly starting to happen now, the parallels that can be drawn between human rights and animal rights, and the gap between the two that we're slowly managing to bring closer and closer. I think that it can benefit the support of an animal rights movement, as the proximity to the parallels between humans just gets closer and closer.
I think that human rights, animal rights, all of it needs to be spoken about together. I think it boils down to, you asked a question earlier around which are you more inclined to support? And I work for a human rights organization, but at my core, my natural shift has always been to go towards animals and animal rights. But I think what really kept me in the human rights space is, at the end of the day, how a human, if we start with a child or if we start with any person, how they interact with someone or something that has less power. So when we're talking about an animal, there can be less power in the way structures have been set up. So if we look at a domesticated animal, for example, how a person who is stronger, who has more power in a particular situation acts, is very, very telling for how a person is going to behave going forward. A lot of the key telltale signs of a conduct disorder in any young person is how they treat animals. One of the things is their aggression towards something deemed weaker or deemed less than or deemed less valuable. Again, all these labels that have been put on something because it doesn't share the same characteristics. It can be then we then link it to human rights, and we talk about discrimination, or how certain bodies have been deemed less than, and how that person who is deemed as superior treats that person or that being or that animal or that situation, is a really telling sign as to how we're going to be as an entire species. So they can't exist without the other, because you can have incredible human rights defenders who are all about, challenging discrimination, challenging human rights violations. But if you're allowing someone 2 doors down to abuse an animal, what is stopping them from taking that to a human, or vice versa, or something like that? So I don't think they can go one without the other, because any type of long-term social and political change requires, intersectionality, like what was mentioned. We have to look at it from a bigger picture lens and understand how every single puzzle piece forms part of how we're going to act as human beings, how we're going to treat those around us. And a big sign, if you're going to treat something that doesn't have a voice in a space, now I'm not talking about humans here, because every single human being has a voice, they just are silenced in many instances. Animals, if we're looking at a human being lens, or a lens around humans, they cannot communicate in the way that we communicate. There's communication styles, all of that, but they cannot communicate, and they cannot access certain resources that we can access. Because why? We've set up the resources to benefit us, because human beings have sat themselves at the top of the food chain. We do an activity with young people often when we talk about the role of everyday activism, how you can actually bring the change by recognizing what everyday actions you do. And there's an activity that goes, you take a bunch of cups and you have the bottom row, and how when you're little, you build them up. And we always say to them, draw human at the top, then it's animals, then it's, earth, whatever the order, humans is always at the top. And we ask them the question of which one can you remove without upsetting everything? And at the end of the day, it's the one at the top, human beings. Now, obviously, I'm not going into the whole biology around it and all the scientific and how we're all interlinked in some way. But at the end of the day, the most damage caused is by us as human beings at the top. You take that away, the system doesn't necessarily crumble. But you take away animals, you take away, the different factors that involved. You take away water, you take away that, we all crumble. So it's about recognizing the role we play, that whilst we sit at the top, we have a responsibility to make sure that the different factors that build up us at the top remain, so that we are safe, we are heard, we are seen, and animals feel the same way. So I think it has to be done together.
I recently just had to do a paper, and I was reading an article about potentially predicting the next pandemic and how COVID-19 came from bats. And it got me thinking, how is it that these interactions between bats and human diseases come from them, and we suddenly have pandemics and whatnot? And it made me realize that in the same way that climate change is affecting humans and we become misplaced by all of these disasters and all of these, like the flooding in Durban, it's also the same. It's in the article that I read, it's also the same for bats. They move into human areas because deforestation, or us humans moving into their habitats and taking over, is causing them to interact more and more with that. These conversations are had about veganism and how when you bring up our rights and we try to place our rights above animals' rights, it's very important to remember that when we do start talking about how climate change is affecting human beings, it's not only just affecting human beings, it's affecting bats, and now it's causing pandemics and other things are happening. So yes, it is about that intersectionality, and all of these relationships deserve their individual attention because some way, somehow, they affect us in different ways.
Thank you so much, Elsie. Guys, we really appreciate all of your opinions and your perspectives on this very needed topic that needs to be discussed, not just by us, but by the greater communities that we exist in. And we'd love to get your closing statements on equating animal rights to human rights.
I think veganism is still something that a lot of people do not accessible. And I think that when we look at the kind of and the context that we're in, where we have such high levels of prevailing inequality, violence that doesn't just span across people, but it's violence that spans across, the animals and the world that we're part of, it can become very, very difficult. But I think more and more what we must always bring it down to is, at the end of the day, we want a safe world, and we don't ever want anyone or anything or any being to feel like they do not have access to some element of freedom or freedom in general. Does that mean that there's still responsibility on us as human beings if we hold the power, because we've created certain systems where animals form part of said systems rather than existing in harmony in the way that we would have had years prior, before, industrialization and the mass production and all of that? But I think every single day, if we just make those conscious efforts to say, if it is in my power, which it is, we've seen it. We've seen many people from vast arrays of context, vast arrays of access to resources. So it's not just veganism and animal rights, and believing in animal rights is not something reserved to a particular type of person. It's every single type of person is involved in it if you believe in not harming those around you, and making sure that we don't always make our lens about humans, but about everyone and everything around us. I think that will be a really, really formative change. And I think it'll have a ripple effect. Not only will it see, we're seeing improvements in diet when it comes to changing over to, respecting the rights of animals and not consuming animal byproducts. And there's a reason why food on the shelf does not look like the animal that we are consuming, so let's start looking at, why is there so many people having this moral dilemma? We need more conversations like this so that we can start sitting with the discomfort and start feeling, why do we feel that way? How do we start moving towards sort of a common ground, and how do we start engaging with people that haven't yet come to the realization that veganism or promoting animal rights or recognizing animal rights as an important focus point is actually going to ultimately also help humans in accessing their rights, because it becomes easier then to ensure that we're not discriminating against other human beings, if we're able to take a step outside of ourselves and stop discriminating against other species. So yeah, thank you so much.
For me, final thoughts, in the long run, I believe that veganism will win, or at least something adjacent to veganism, because whenever we have different laws, different conversations, and different ethical, like an adaptation or at least an evolution of our moral compass to consider other animals, other beings, that position just seems like the direction we want to take our world in. There aren't a lot of people that currently don't see that the vegan movement does have its positives, it does have its points, and I definitely believe that. I definitely believe that talking about human rights, animal rights, opens windows to those conversations. One flows into another, and the more that we can evolve and just eventually be a part of a society that considers both animals and humans to be beings that deserve to be protected, that deserve love, and that deserve freedom. Yeah, that's my final thought.
I wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to speak. I've been working a lot on dealing with my calling in the most recent years and trying to find my own expression of that, because I feel culturally, as the mixed spot that we come from, we don't necessarily have just one way. And I wanted to check if there were other ways for me to answer calling outside of the concept of the sacrifice of animals. Coming from my roots where sacrifices of animals are celebrated annually, and it's a big deal. You know, it's part of the Labarangs. And I wrote extensively about it publicly, related to the aspects of it. And when we decide to answer calling, we have to decide exactly how we want to walk there and express our purpose. And I always wanted it to be practical for me. I wanted to have the space to make choices and change my mind and do all of those things. And I feel when you are supported by a tribe, they give you the space to decide. And whether you're changing your mind or not, you kind of have the support always. And I always like to lend that to a community. And this is a really beautiful way to receive it, you know? So thank you. That's my closing.
Thank you so much, Lamise.
So my closing really echoes a lot that Elsie and Kayla said. I'm going to say it again, I sound like a stuck record, but intersectionality is something that is really important. You know, like Kayla said before, humans were the only thing that mattered. You know, we could destroy absolutely everything in our wake, which we have, and all for the benefit of humans. And I think now we're starting to see that is to our detriment. And so, you know, I hope that mindset changes. And what leaves me feeling positive is if you look at the view of not only veganism, but animal rights as a whole, a shift between, say, 7 years ago and now, it has been massive. The shift in perspective as well, where people, you know, would view vegans as this militant people who just want to, you know, come and shout at you and tell you that everything you do is wrong. Where now the fact that every restaurant has a vegan option, the fact that you can go into any major grocery store and find 5 different types of, you know, dairy alternatives, it gives me hope that people are starting to make that connection and starting to, you know, put the little puzzle pieces together. So at the moment, there is still that very, very big gap, but I'm very positive that someday it's going to change. And I also think that we do need to be very mindful on how we approach these conversations with people who may not have the same mindset as we do. Going to somebody and, you know, immediately comparing sexual assault and how they feel broken and hurt inside to the way that a cow may feel, that is very alienating. It can push someone very far away. And that's never the conversation that we're trying to have. We don't ever want to, put someone's pain above another. And if we approach it from a side of empathy, it's empathy for both, and it's not one's pain isn't bigger than another, one's experience isn't bigger than another, but it affects each person in a different way. And it's important for us to frame it that way. It's important for us to understand that the more we come across as attacking, the less receptive people are going to be to even speaking to us.
I think this world needs to be more compassionate, and I think we have to show a lot more empathy. And we do have a long way to go with the animal rights movement and with humans as well. But I agree that we can't really equate the two. I just don't think it's okay. I think we have a long way to go, and the world just needs to be more empathetic.
Thank you so much, Danny. Just as us humans, all animals have the ability to experience both joy and suffering. We all feel pain, pleasure, fear, frustration, loneliness, and motherly love. As there is both human and animal oppression, we are encouraged to appreciate that there is a need for both to be advocated for. However, we also need to be mindful of the language that we use around acts of animal oppression so as to not be insensitive to the human experience or trauma. We do believe, though, that the vocabulary should be broadened to include terms that are traditionally associated with the human experiences, so that we can bridge the gap between species and the experiences of oppression. We have more in common than not, and it is a point of strengthening and uniting us rather than dividing us. We want to thank you, everyone, once again for participating in this very needed conversation. And we can't wait to share this with our community and get everybody else's perspective as well. And just to personally thank you, everybody, Elsie, Kayla, Lamiz, Danny, and Risha, for contributing your much needed and informed opinions to this conversation. It will definitely resonate with our wider community. And we can't wait to have more conversations like this as well, just to further the movement and continue talking about the gray areas that are needed to be talked about. And we also can't wait to hopefully see you guys at our next market on Sunday, the 2nd of April at the range in Tokai. It will be a beautiful celebration of another year. It will be our Vegan Goods Market birthday. We are turning 7, and we can't wait to celebrate with you guys. And yeah, we thank you, each and everyone, for your support for our space, for journeying with us through our growth, and also just for supporting our online work and our online community. If it weren't for you guys, we wouldn't be doing episode number 2 of our VGM Community Convo. So everybody give a round for yourselves.
Sean, can I just jump in and say thank you very much to you. You are the person who came up with the idea of doing these things, and it's conversations that people are afraid to have. So, taking that step and bringing people together to talk about these difficult conversations it's massive, and you're creating a community of people who learn so much from everything that you do. So thank you so much for, just putting this together. This is definitely not going to be the last episode.
Definitely. We're putting it out there into the universe. Thank you so much, Risha. And we can't wait to see you once again at the next Vegan Goods Market on the 2nd of April. Until next time, VGM signing out. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.